The night we moved in, my stepmother's ring cut my hand. My father just carried boxes past us, refusing to meet my eyes. I learned to quietly file the pain away, but the evidence I saved to the cloud. 10 years later, as she accepted her pin for chief people officer, I stood behind the projector holding a court order, a data vault, and the receipts for every silent wound she'd inflicted. My name is Nora Quinn. 10 years ago, when I was 19, I set a cardboard box marked kitchen down on the polished oak floor of apartment 12B. The new apartment smelled of things that were supposed to signal a beginning: fresh paint, the faint chemical scent of wood varnish, and the clean, empty air of a space not yet lived in. The late afternoon sun slanted through the large, bare windows, illuminating a universe of dust motes dancing in the golden light. It was a blank slate, a place where my father, Dean, and his new wife, Sable, were meant to build a new life. I was just a leftover piece from the old one, a piece they had to find a place for. Sable stood by the kitchen island, her arms crossed over her chest. She wasn't directing the movers or helping my father. She was supervising the space itself, as if guarding it from contamination. Her perfume, a sharp, expensive floral, cut through the smell of the new construction. "Be careful with those, Nora," she said, her voice a low hum that was somehow louder than the echoing footsteps in the empty rooms. "I don't want this place scuffed up before we've even spent a night here. These are Brazilian cherry floors." I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands were raw from the rough edges of the cardboard. I picked up the box again, my knuckles brushing against the wall as I hoisted it onto my hip for a better grip. I shuffled towards the counter, my sneakers squeaking softly on the pristine varnish. The box was heavy, filled with my mother's old ceramic plates, the ones Dad hadn't had the heart to throw away, but didn't have the spine to defend. As I pivoted to set it down on the granite countertop, the corner of the cardboard carton, reinforced with thick packing tape, scraped against the side of a newly installed cabinet. It was not a loud sound. It was a soft, tearing whisper. A tiny white line, no longer than my thumbnail, appeared on the dark cherry wood, a flaw in the perfection. Sable moved so fast I didn't register it until the sting bloomed across my cheek. Her hand was a blur, her rings cold and hard against my skin. The force of it snapped my head to the side, and the world went bright white for a second, my ear ringing with a high, thin whine. I tasted salt and metal as my teeth cut the inside of my lip. The shock was a physical thing, a wave of ice water that washed over me, leaving me breathless. "I told you to be careful," she hissed, her face inches from mine. Her eyes, a pale, cold blue, were alight with a fury that was terrifying in its intensity. It was the kind of anger that had no reason, no logic. It was pure, distilled dominance. "This is my home now. You will respect it. You will respect me." I stood frozen, the box still clutched in my arms. The warm, coppery taste of blood filled my mouth. My cheek throbbed in time with my pulse, a hot, shameful beat. And in that moment, framed in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, my father appeared. He was carrying a box labeled books. His face was a mask of strained neutrality. He saw it. I know he saw it. I saw the flicker in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw as he took in the scene. His new wife breathing fire. His daughter holding back tears with a bleeding lip. He saw the red handprint already starting to bloom on my face. And he did nothing. He didn't speak. He didn't stop. He adjusted his grip on the heavy box, took a small sidestep to navigate around us, and continued walking down the hall as if he were merely passing two strangers, two pieces of furniture that were temporarily blocking his path. He was a statue, animated only by the need to move his burden from one place to another. His silence was louder than the slap. It was an endorsement. It was an abandonment. In that hollow, echoing apartment, his footsteps receding down the hall were the sound of my world breaking. I swallowed the words, the anger, the pain. I set the box down on the counter with a quiet thud. My hands were shaking. Sable watched me, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had won. She had established the new order. But as I turned away from her, my body moving on autopilot, a new instinct took over. It was cold and clear and sharp, a single point of focus in the swirling chaos of my emotions, in the small guest bathroom, the one that was supposed to be mine. I locked the door. The reflection that stared back at me was a stranger, a girl with a swollen cheek, wild eyes, and a thin trickle of blood from the corner of her mouth. I pulled out my phone, my fingers, still trembling, fumbled with the passcode. I opened the camera, switched it to the front-facing view, and took a picture. The flash was harsh, clinical. It documented the split lip, the angry red welt. Then, I angled the phone down and took another photo of my wrist, where her rings had left a series of deep, red indentations that were already beginning to bruise. It was a new habit, this quiet collection of data, a defense mechanism learned over the last year of small cruelties and escalating aggression. A floorboard creaked outside the door. I held my breath. From the hallway, I could hear the whisper-thin sound of a neighbor's door, apartment 12A, cracking open and then clicking shut. A witness. Then I remembered the small, black dome of the security camera mounted on the ceiling of the main hallway, its single, unobtrusive eye aimed directly at our front door. It would have captured everything. The open door, Sable's lunge, my father's calculated passage, a silent, impartial observer. Sable's voice came through the door, soft and menacing. "Nora, you will not say a word about this to anyone. Do you understand me? This is a family matter." My throat was tight. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. "I understand," I whispered back, my voice hoarse. "Good girl." I listened to her footsteps walk away. Then, I went to my phone's settings. Wi-Fi was already connected. I found the iCloud menu, navigated to Photos, and toggled the switch for iCloud Photo Library. I watched as the small progress bar appeared, uploading 2 items. My mind was working with a strange, detached clarity. I opened the newly uploaded photos, created a new, hidden album, and moved them into it. I needed a name for the file, a designation that was both anonymous and precise. I thought of the hallway camera footage, a clip that now existed on a server somewhere, a digital ghost of the last 5 minutes. I created a new note and typed 12B entry 01. It was the first entry in a ledger no one else knew I was keeping. The first piece of evidence. That night, long after the movers were gone and the apartment had settled into a tense, artificial quiet, I sat on the edge of the tub in my new bathroom, letting cold water run over my wrist. The skin was a mottled pattern of purple and blue. The physical pain was a dull ache, but the real wound was deeper. It was the understanding that settled in my bones, cold and heavy as lead. I had been wrong to think that speaking up was the only way to fight. They expected tears. They expected accusations. That was a battle I would lose. My father had already shown me which side he was on. Sable's power came from loud, explosive acts. My power, I realized, would have to come from the opposite. Silence could be a weapon, too. Patience could be a shield. My silence would be an act of observation, of collection. It would be the soil in which a different kind of justice could grow, slowly and quietly, until it was ready to break the surface. The door creaked open. It was my father. He didn't look at my wrist, or the fading mark on my cheek. His gaze was fixed on the towel rack above my head. His voice was casual, deliberately so, as if he were asking about the weather. "Did you remember to bring the toolbox from the old garage?" he asked. The question was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the reality of the day, that it almost made me laugh. He was building a new life, and all he could think about were the tools. He was trying to paper over the gaping wound in our family with the mundane. I stood up, turning off the water. I looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time all day, I saw a man I didn't know anymore, a man who had chosen comfort over his child. "Yes," I said, my voice even and calm. "I brought it, and the evidence, in the new house, under the new regime." Sable drew lines everywhere, not just on the floors where the movers should walk, but in the air itself. The rules were unspoken at first, then codified into a domestic constitution of suffocating precision. Dishes go on the right side of the dishwasher, cutlery facing down. Towels are to be folded in thirds, not in half. Your voice is to be kept at a conversational level, which is to say, silent unless spoken to. My life in apartment 12B became an exercise in invisibility. I learned to walk without making the floorboards creak, to close doors without a sound, to exist in the margins of their new life. 6 months after they married, Sable, with her polished resume and predatory charm, landed a manager position in the Human Resources Department at Grayford Systems. It was a local medical technology giant, the kind of stable, respectable corporation that anchored the entire town of Ridgemont. She spoke of it in grand terms, of nurturing talent and building corporate culture. To hear her tell it, she wasn't just an HR manager, she was an architect of human potential, and she was good at it. She climbed. People liked her. She had a gift for remembering names, for deploying a perfectly timed compliment, for making executives feel like their ideas were brilliant. Within 5 years, she was a director. By year 8, she was vice president of people operations, a title she invented for herself. My own path was quieter, more deliberate. I majored in forensic accounting and information systems at the local university, working part-time as a barista to stay out of the apartment as much as possible. When it came time for a junior year internship, there was only one logical choice. I applied to Grayford Systems, not in HR, not in marketing, but in the quiet, unglamorous basement of the corporate world. Internal audit. While Sable was hosting empowerment lunches in sunny conference rooms, I was in a gray cubicle learning how to follow the money. I learned that a company's soul isn't in its mission statement, it's in its expense reports. After graduation, they offered me a full-time position. I accepted a role in the Department of Compliance and Internal Investigations. I was the person you called when things went wrong. It was a perfect fit. I was good at finding what people tried to hide. My father saw none of it. To him, Sable was a miracle. "She's the backbone of this family. Nora," he'd say over tense holiday dinners, his voice filled with a genuine, baffling adoration. "She's given me a new lease on life." He saw her ambition as strength, her control as stability. My quietness, my focus on my career, was a different matter. Once, when I tried to explain the complexities of a data integrity case I was working on, he'd waved his hand dismissively. "It all sounds so negative. You've always been too sensitive. Nora, you need to learn to see the good in people, like Sable does." He said it with a gentle, paternal smile, the same smile he'd worn 10 years earlier as he'd stepped around my humiliation in the hallway. He didn't see the irony. He saw a sensitive daughter and a strong wife. He never considered that one was a reaction to the other. The evidence collection began on a Saturday. Sable was out at a spa. A networking opportunity, she called it. My father was raking leaves. I was doing their laundry, a chore delegated to me unspokenly. As I emptied the pockets of his work trousers, I found a crumpled receipt from a high-end boutique downtown, a $500 silk scarf. It wasn't his style. At the bottom of the receipt, the payment method was listed, a corporate American Express card. His name was on it, but scrawled in the memo line, in Sable's elegant, looping handwriting, were 2 words: Employee Wellness Gift. My heart began to beat a little faster. It was a lie, a small, neat, easily digestible lie. Who was the employee? The recipient of the gift? Her? It was a test, a probe to see what she could get away with. I went into the home office, a room I was not encouraged to enter. His briefcase was on the floor by the desk. Inside, tucked into a leather folio, was the corporate card statement. I found the charge. It was there, nestled between a catered lunch for the executive team and a software license renewal. just another line item. I took the receipt and the statement into my room, smoothed them out on my desk, and photographed them with my phone. The light was flat, the focus sharp. I uploaded the images to the same hidden cloud album as 12B entry 01. Then I opened a new Excel document. The stark white grid of cells felt clean, logical. In cell A1, I typed a file name, Wellness Spend Sable, XLSX. I created columns, date, vendor, item description, amount, justification, evidence link. I filled in the first row. It was a small act of rebellion, silent and precise. I returned the papers to his briefcase, the receipt to his pocket, and finished the laundry. No one ever knew. The single line in the spreadsheet became 2, then 10, then 50, a cashmere sweater from a designer shop, team morale booster, a set of expensive golf clubs, client appreciation, declined. A weekend at a vineyard, executive off-site planning. Each purchase was on my father's corporate card, the one he was too busy or too trusting to scrutinize, and each was meticulously miscategorized by Sable. The bruises on my wrist from that first day had faded within a week, but my spreadsheet grew with a life of its own. It was a quiet, methodical catalog of her character, a long-form study in avarice and deceit. Then came Briar Lodge. It was an exclusive, rustic chic resort in the mountains, a few hours outside of Ridgemont. Sable began organizing mandatory leadership retreats there for her HR team and favored executives. The costs were astronomical. I started seeing the invoices come to the house, as Sable had them routed there for her convenience. One evening, while sorting the mail, I saw an itemized bill from the lodge. It detailed the costs for a 3-day retreat: lodging, team-building activities, catering, and then, at the bottom, was a separate charge from the lodge's private wine cellar, a case of 1998 Chateau Margaux. It was a fantastically expensive, notoriously rare wine. It was also my father's absolute favorite, the bottle he spoke of with the reverence a priest reserves for scripture. I felt a familiar cold clarity settle over me. I cross-referenced the supplementary card number on the wine cellar receipt. It matched my father's corporate Amex. The date of the charge corresponded with the final day of the leadership retreat. It also corresponded with my father's 55th birthday. He had mentioned in passing that Sable had surprised him with an incredible gift, a taste of something he thought he'd never have again. He thought it was love. It was just another line item. I photographed the invoice, logged it in the spreadsheet, and linked the file. Item description: rare wine. Justification: executive retreat refreshments. Actual purpose: personal gift for Dean Quinn. As I typed, I realized I had learned a new language. I had spent years in the quiet corners of Grayford Systems, learning to read the stories hidden in numbers. People could lie. They could smile and charm and persuade. But the ledgers, if you knew how to look, always told the truth. Kindness was a donation to the Employee Hardship Fund. Cruelty was a pattern of termination codes that only targeted older workers. And Sable's particular brand of corruption was a long, neat column of fraudulent expenses, each one a brick in the wall of a case I was slowly, patiently building, in my world. The truth arrived in whispers. I was the custodian of the Grayford Systems Anonymous Whistleblower Hotline, a digital confessional where employees poured out their grievances, fears, and accusations. Each submission was a data point of human misery: sexual harassment, time card fraud, safety violations. My job was to be dispassionate, to strip the emotion from the report, assign a case number, and begin the methodical process of verification. I lived in a world of metadata, of cross-referencing email headers with server access logs, of determining whether a deleted file was truly gone or simply waiting to be found. I treated every allegation as a hypothesis to be tested, and every piece of data as a potential exhibit. The first official overlap between my professional life and my private obsession occurred during the annual Employee Satisfaction Survey. The raw results came to my department for preliminary analysis, before being packaged for the board's audit committee. I saw the unfiltered numbers. 17% of respondents in people operations reported feeling pressured to participate in unpaid after-hours work functions. A dozen comments specifically mentioned feeling that their career progression was contingent on their social relationship with senior leadership. When the final report was prepared by Sable's team for the committee, these data points had been refined. The 17% figure was aggregated into a broader, vaguer category called work-life balance challenges. The written comments were summarized as a desire for clearer communication around voluntary events. It wasn't a lie, but it was a careful, deliberate sanitization of the truth. It was fraud, just with words instead of numbers. That evening, I went home and opened the Wellness Spend Sable file. It was no longer a simple spreadsheet. It was a case file. I created a new protocol document, outlining a strict chain of custody procedure for every piece of digital evidence I collected. Each photo of a receipt, each PDF of a credit card statement, was now assigned a unique identifier. I ran a cryptographic hash function, SHA-256, on each file, generating a unique digital fingerprint. I logged the date, time, and source of acquisition. I documented the IP address from which I accessed the corporate network when I downloaded a suspicious expense report. From now on, every piece of evidence would be unimpeachable, its integrity, from the moment of its discovery to its eventual presentation, would be absolute. I was building a case, not a grudge. With this new rigor, the pattern became undeniable. I started correlating the expense reports with Sable's public-facing life, her Instagram, my father's calendar, the company's own internal newsletter, a weekend trip to a Napa vineyard, expensed as vendor relationship building, occurred on her wedding anniversary. A surge in gift card purchases under employee recognition happened the week of her stepson's graduation. The line item for Team Wellness Offsite, Yoga Retreat for 5 people coincided with a spa weekend she took with 4 of her old friends from college, a fact she cheerfully documented on social media. It was brazen. The wellness budget of the People Operations Department was her personal slush fund. I started mapping her direct reports and their expense habits. An inner circle emerged. The same 4 directors who accompanied her on the yoga retreat were also the recipients of duplicate benefits. They received the standard corporate performance bonus, but I found records of a second, discretionary bonus paid out from a separate cost center Sable controlled. They were issued top-of-the-line laptops, only to have them refreshed with new models 6 months later. The old ones written off. It was benefit stacking, a quiet and insidious form of corporate favoritism that bred loyalty through complicity. The human cost of this system walked into my life on a Tuesday afternoon. A young woman, a graphic designer on a 6-month contract, requested a meeting under the anonymous protocol. She was terrified. She sat across from me in a small, soundproof interview room, twisting a paperclip in her hands. "It's about the retreats," she whispered. "At Briar Lodge. I can't afford to go. It's a whole weekend, unpaid. But my manager, who reports directly to VP Quinn, she told me that my contract renewal depends on my being a team player." "Did she explicitly say your contract would not be renewed if you didn't go?" I asked, keeping my voice level, betraying none of the cold fury solidifying in my chest. She said Sable likes to see dedication beyond the clock, and that my hours could be reallocated if I wasn't a good fit for the culture. The threat was clear. For a contract worker, a reduction in hours was a death sentence. "Would you be willing to state that on the record?" I asked. "Your identity would be protected." She hesitated, her eyes darting towards the door. "I can record this," I said softly. "Just an audio recording, for my files only. The laws in Elmsford state that only one party in a conversation needs to consent to it being recorded. I am giving my consent. The file will be encrypted and secured. It will only be used if a formal investigation is opened." She looked at me, her fear warring with her desperation. She finally gave a small, jerky nod. I enabled the recording app on my tablet, stated the date, time, and participants for the record, and let her talk. I saved the file, Case File 78B Coercion, M4A. I added a new tab to my spreadsheet. Witness Testimony. Armed with this, I decided to test the system. I filed a preliminary audit request for the People Operations Discretionary Budget, citing anonymous but credible reports of potential misuse of funds. I kept it vague. Official. The response was telling. The meeting with the Chief Financial Officer was postponed, twice. When I finally did get 10 minutes of his time, he smiled, a placid, untroubled expression. He leaned back in his leather chair. Nora, you're doing great work in compliance, really tightening things up. But this feels like stirring the pot for the sake of it. Sable is a valuable member of our leadership team. Let's not get bogged down in administrative minutia, shall we? He was telling me to stand down. He was protecting her. That was the final confirmation I needed. The corruption wasn't just Sable. It was systemic. They wouldn't investigate themselves, so I would have to give them no choice. I went back to my desk and opened a new service request with the IT department. It was a request to use the corporate e-discovery software, a powerful search tool normally reserved for major litigation. It could scan the entire company server, emails, chat logs, presentations, deleted files, for specific keywords, citing my ongoing, officially logged audit of discretionary spending as justification. I created a new search query. My target was narrow: the mailboxes and network drives of Sable Quinn and her 4 inner circle directors. The time frame was the last 5 years, and the keywords were a litany of her sins. Retreat, lodge, Briar Lodge, gift, comp card, wellness, bonus, self-care, spa, approved dean, override, personal. I clicked execute. The system began to churn. The digital gears of a machine designed for discovery now repurposed for destruction. It was a scanner, and I had just pointed it at the rot hidden in the heart of the company. Now, I just had to wait for the results. The CFO's placid smile was a declaration of war. He wasn't just dismissing my audit. He was confirming the existence of a wall. It was a wall of polite denial, of executive solidarity, of men in expensive suits protecting one of their own from the administrative minutiae of her crimes. My e-discovery search would yield a mountain of data. But data is useless if the people who are supposed to act on it refuse to see it. I realized I could not win this fight inside the company's walls. I needed a different kind of weapon. I needed the law. I found Attorney Mercer through a referral from a law school professor. His office was on the 34th floor of a steel and glass tower downtown, a world away from Grayford's manicured suburban campus. The air smelled of polished mahogany, old leather, and the quiet, expensive hum of centralized air conditioning. Mercer was a small, neat man in his late 50s, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He didn't offer pleasantries. He gestured to a chair, sat opposite me behind a vast, empty desk, and said, "Tell me what you have." I didn't tell him about my father, or the sting of a slap 10 years ago, or the quiet, simmering rage that had fueled me for a decade. I gave him the facts. I spoke in the language of my profession. Forensic accounting, data integrity, chain of custody. I laid out the shell company Sable had used to funnel funds to a consultant who was actually her brother. I detailed the benefit stacking, the coerced participation in unpaid events, the sanitized survey results. I explained the structure of my evidence, a master file, Project Nightingale, containing everything. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You've built a fortress," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Every piece of evidence is hashed, timestamps logged." "Yes, Shea 256, every file." "You have the testimony from the contract worker?" "Encrypted audio file. I was a consenting party to the recording, as per Elmsford state law." He nodded slowly. "This is a strong case for a shareholder derivative suit, a whistleblower complaint to the SEC. But it's slow. They'll bury you in motions. They'll fire you for a fabricated cause. They'll bleed you dry." "I know," I said. "That's the corporate case. There's a personal one, too." For the first time, I showed him the photo 12B entry 01. The swollen cheek, the split lip. I explained the context. Move-in day, the slap, my father's deliberate blindness. It established a pattern of intimidation and control that continues to this day, I said, my voice clinical. The coercion of junior employees is an extension of that behavior. She creates an environment of fear to get what she wants, both at home and at work. Mercer leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the image on my tablet. This, he said, tapping the screen, is our leverage. The corporate malfeasance is the crime, but the violence is the key. It gives us speed. It gives us an element of surprise. We spent the next week transforming my decade of silent work into a legal document. We filed a petition with the Ridgemont Superior Court for a temporary restraining order against Sable Quinn. The grounds were clear. A documented history of domestic violence, coupled with a pattern of ongoing professional intimidation that created a hostile environment, effectively preventing me from feeling safe even in my own home, which I had recently moved out of. The petition was supported by a sworn declaration, Exhibit A being the time-stamped photograph from 10 years prior. We argued that her escalating and brazen behavior at work was indicative of a person with no regard for rules or boundaries, making her a credible threat. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Alvarez, signed the order in an ex parte hearing. It was temporary, pending a full hearing in 2 weeks, but its power was immediate. Sable Quinn was legally required to stay at least 100 yards away from me and my new apartment. She was barred from contacting me directly or indirectly. The order was sealed. For now, only the court, Mercer, and I knew it existed. We hadn't served her yet. A TRO is a bomb. You don't detonate it until the last possible second. The next move was on the corporate chessboard. It was announced internally that Sable was being promoted. The board had created a new C-suite position just for her, Chief People Officer. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for the following Monday. She was no longer just a VP. She was about to become one of the most powerful people in the company. "They're giving her a crown," Mercer said over the phone. "We're going to turn it into a guillotine." He drafted a carefully worded letter to the chairman of the Grayford Audit Committee, a retired banking executive named Arthur Vance. The letter was sent from Mercer's office, marked Attorney-Client Privileged Communication. It didn't contain the evidence itself, only a chilling summary. It spoke of a shadow budget within people operations, of compelled participation in unpaid activities, and of significant financial and ethical irregularities directly tied to the nominee for the CPO position. It was just enough to trigger their fiduciary duty, to force them to act. To ignore such a letter from a reputable law firm would be an act of gross negligence. Vance's executive assistant called Mercer's office within the hour. A special in-person meeting of the audit committee was scheduled. The time, 7:30 a.m. on Monday, 90 minutes before Sable's promotion ceremony was due to begin. With the meeting set, I made my final move. As a senior investigator in the compliance department, I had the authority to do it. I opened the corporate legal portal and issued a formal litigation hold notice to the IT department. The directive was immediate and non-negotiable. The mailboxes, network drives, and all associated electronic data for Sable Quinn and her 4 key directors were to be preserved and frozen. Nothing could be altered or deleted. It was a standard procedure in any corporate investigation, but it was also a tripwire. The wire snapped at 1:13 a.m. on Sunday morning. I was at home, unable to sleep, monitoring the network security dashboard on my encrypted work laptop. An alert flared on my screen. It came from a new AI-driven behavioral analytics tool our team was piloting. The tool flagged a high-volume data deletion event originating from Sable's company-issued laptop. The target wasn't the email server. The litigation hold had locked that down. The target was the desktop client for Signal. The encrypted messaging app, the AI's pattern recognition algorithm, noted that the deletions were systematic and synced with a mobile device, a classic sign of evidence spoliation. She was trying to scrub her tracks. She was panicking. She knew something was coming. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Mercer. I called the head of our Digital Forensics and Incident Response, DIR team, a man named Kenji Tanaka. I woke him up. Kenji, it's Nora Quinn. I need your help. It's urgent. I explained the litigation hold and the deletion alert. She's burning the evidence, I said. We need to act before her laptop is powered down or rebooted. What do you need? He asked, his voice already sharp and awake. I need a snapshot, a full, bit-for-bit image of the volatile memory from her machine. Now, before she comes in on Monday, she's deleting messages, but the forensic artifacts, decryption keys, fragments of the message database might still be in the RAM. It's our only shot at recovering what she just destroyed. There was a pause on the line. What I was asking for was extreme. It required remote, stealth access to a senior executive's computer. It was the digital equivalent of a no-knock warrant. My authority code for this is NC 771B, I said, formally authorizing the request. The justification is active and ongoing destruction of evidence pertinent to a pending internal audit. Another pause. Then, I'm on my way to the office, Kenji said. You'll have your memory image within the hour. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the dark, sleeping city. The pieces were in motion. The trap was set. The bomb was waiting. Sable was about to walk into her coronation, unaware that the room had already been turned into a courtroom, and I had just collected the last piece of evidence against her. The ballroom on the 27th floor of the Grayford Tower was designed to project power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Ridgemont, a city spread out like a circuit board below. The light was a brilliant, sterile white, reflecting off polished chrome and the crystal glasses of champagne being passed on silent silver trays. The air hummed with the quiet, confident murmur of the corporate elite. At the front of the room, a massive banner hung behind a sleek lectern. In clean, sans-serif font, it read, People First. Sable stood beside the CEO, radiant under the spotlights. She wore a tailored white suit, a stark statement of purity and command. She was a marble statue of success, in the front row. My father sat with his hands clasped, his face a mask of uncomplicated, uncritical pride. He was watching his wife, the backbone of his life, ascend to the corporate heavens. He looked happy. I stood in the darkness at the back of the room. Tucked into the alcove that housed the audio-visual console, the space smelled of warm electronics and ozone. To my left, Mark, the building's head of security, stood with his arms crossed. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was watching me. He was a quiet, solid man who understood process and protocol. In the inner pocket of my blazer, a long, sealed envelope felt as heavy and dense as a bar of lead. It was the copy of the temporary restraining order, served and filed, a paper bomb. The CEO, a man with a politician's smile named Robert Ashford, stepped to the microphone. The room fell silent. Today is a landmark day for Grayford Systems, he began, his voice booming through the speakers. We are not just adding a role to our C-suite. We are making a statement about our values. We are elevating the very concept of people to the heart of our strategy, and there is no one, absolutely no one, more qualified to lead that charge than Sable Quinn. There was a wave of polite, enthusiastic applause. My father clapped the loudest. Ashford pinned a small, custom-designed gold pin to the lapel of Sable's jacket. She smiled, a perfect, dazzling expression of humility and gratitude. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Sable, Ashford said, stepping back. The floor is yours. Sable approached the microphone. She placed her hands on either side of the lectern, a gesture of both grounding and command. She took a deep, audible breath, a little piece of theater to signal vulnerability. Thank you, Robert, she began, her voice smooth and resonant. Thank you, all of you. People first. It's more than a slogan to me. It's a mission. In my years here, I've learned that a corporation isn't a building or a balance sheet. It's a collection of souls, and my work, our work, is to create an environment of absolute psychological safety, a place where every employee feels seen, heard, and valued. A place where we can bring our authentic selves to work without fear. A place for healing. My hand was resting on the laptop that controlled the main projector. My pulse was a heavy, rhythmic thud against the cool metal case. Healing. The word hung in the air, obscene in its hypocrisy. As she paused for effect, letting the weight of her noble words settle over the room, I pressed the right arrow key. The slide behind her changed. Her corporate headshot and the People First logo vanished. In its place, stark white text appeared on a black background. It was a simple question. Wellness or self-dealing? A ripple went through the room, a confused murmur. Sable, blinded by the stage lights, hadn't seen it yet. She continued, "A place where the old wounds of a toxic workplace can finally—" She faltered as she saw the faces in the front row, the smiles frozen, the eyes wide and fixed on the screen behind her. She turned. For a split second, her composure fractured. I saw a flash of pure, cold panic in her eyes. Then the mask snapped back into place. But before she could speak, I pressed the arrow key again. The text disappeared. For 3 seconds, the massive screen was filled with a silent, grainy video clip. It was the footage from the hallway security camera. Apartment 12B. 10 years ago. It showed a woman lunging forward, an arm swinging, and a younger version of me stumbling back. There was no sound, just the raw, undeniable physics of the act. A hand, a face, an impact. Then it was gone, replaced by the black slide. The silence in the room was no longer polite. It was a vacuum, a complete absence of sound. Every person was holding their breath. Sable recovered with astonishing speed. She turned back to the microphone and let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with condescending amusement, "it seems we have a disgruntled employee with a talent for Photoshop, a desperate and frankly pathetic attempt to disrupt a wonderful day." I pressed the key again. A new slide appeared. It was a screenshot of the video file's metadata. 12B entry 01, or. It showed the date, the exact time, the source device ID belonging to the Ridgemont apartment complex servers. Below it was my sworn, notarized affidavit, submitted to the court, attesting to the authenticity of the clip. Sable's smile faltered. The word Photoshop died on her lips. She was a shark in a boardroom. But this was a different language. This was the cold, hard language of digital forensics. I pressed the key again. Another slide, a split screen, on the left, a series of invoices from Briar Lodge for executive leadership retreats, all charged to my father's corporate card. On the right, a series of screenshots from Sable's own Instagram account. The dates aligned perfectly. The leadership retreat in February was her anniversary ski trip with my father. The team-building offsite in July was a vacation to Martha's Vineyard with her brother's family. The names of the attendees on the lodge invoices were her inner circle of directors. The faces in the Instagram photos were her family. I pressed the key again. A final invoice, this one from a shell corporation. Vance Strategic Consulting, for $75,000. The justification was executive coaching services. Beside it, a printout from the state's business registry, the sole proprietor of Vance Strategic Consulting, Elias Vance. A simple line of text underneath read, "Relationship, brother of Sable Quinn." A man in the third row stood up. It was Arthur Vance, the chairman of the audit committee. His face was grim. "Robert," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "I think we need to pause this ceremony." The spell was broken. The room erupted in a chaotic buzz of whispers. The CEO, Robert Ashford, looked completely poleaxed, his face pale. As he stammered for a response, a woman from the corporate counsel's office, who had been waiting by the door, walked purposefully towards the stage. She held a single, stapled document. She walked directly up to Sable, who stood frozen by the lectern, and held out the papers. "Sable Quinn," she said, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. "This is a formal litigation hold notice. You are instructed not to delete, alter, or destroy any electronic or physical documents in your possession. Your access to company networks has been suspended, effective immediately. To be served in public, at her own coronation, was the ultimate corporate shaming. It was a signal to everyone in the room that the game was over. And now, it was my turn. I stepped out from the darkness of the AV booth. The crowd instinctively parted as I walked down the center aisle. I could feel my father's eyes on me, but I didn't look at him. My focus was entirely on the woman on the stage. I stopped at the bottom of the short steps. She looked down at me, her face a mask of incandescent hatred. The polished veneer of the HR executive was gone, replaced by the raw fury of the woman who had slapped me in the hallway 10 years ago. I reached into my blazer and pulled out the sealed envelope. I didn't say a word. I simply walked up the steps and held it out to her. Her hand trembled as she took it. "This is a copy of a temporary restraining order, issued by the Superior Court," I said, my voice low but steady, for her ears only. "You are to stay 100 yards away from me at all times." As she stared at the envelope, Mark, the head of security, moved to her side. He was joined by another guard. His voice was polite, almost gentle, but it carried the unyielding weight of authority. "Ms. Quinn," he said softly, "if you'll come with us, please. We need to preserve the integrity of the process." The process. It was the perfect, sterile, corporate term for a public execution. He was escorting her from the stage, from the C-suite, from the life she had built on a foundation of lies and intimidation. My father stood up from his front row seat, his face a mess of confusion and horror. But he didn't move. He just stood there, a statue once again, watching it all unfold. Sable didn't resist. She walked between the two guards, her head held high, a final, defiant act of pride. The room watched in dead silence as she was led out a side door. The ceremony was over. The trap had been sprung. The silence Sable left in her wake was heavier and more suffocating than the noise had been. The buzz of shocked whispers died down, replaced by a collective, awkward uncertainty. People avoided eye contact, staring into their champagne glasses or at the panoramic view of the city, as if the answers might be found there. The People First banner behind the empty lectern felt like a cruel joke. In the center of this silent storm stood the CEO, looking like the captain of a ship that had just been torpedoed. Then, through the sea of frozen guests, my father began to move. He walked towards me, his steps stiff, his face a canvas of disbelief and a dawning, terrible anger. He wasn't looking at me as a daughter. He was looking at a saboteur, a wrecker of worlds. He stopped a few feet away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What are you doing, Nora?" he asked, his voice a low, strangled hiss. He gestured vaguely at the side door through which Sable had disappeared. What was all that? This is her career, her life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his anger. I had spent 10 years learning that my power was not in volume, but in precision. I reached into the folio I had carried with me, the one that held the master file for Project Nightingale. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a clear, high-resolution copy of one of his corporate card statements. I held it out to him. "This is her career," I said, my voice flat and even. He glanced at it, confused. It was just a page of numbers, of line items. I pointed a finger to a charge from a designer jeweler for $3,000. Next to it, in the memo column, was a handwritten note from Sable. She had taken to reviewing his statements for him, a gesture he had seen as helpful, as a sign of a supportive partner. Her elegant, cursive script was unmistakable. It read, "Dean's card. Approved." He stared at the words, his own name, weaponized against him, in her handwriting. It was a detail so small and so intimate, a secret language of their marriage that she had used to defraud the company. He looked from the paper to my face, his own expression beginning to crumble. The anger was dissolving into a watery confusion. I didn't know," he stammered. The words were weak, a reflexive defense from a man who had just realized his castle was built on quicksand. The dam inside me, the one that had held back a decade of unspoken truth, did not break with a roar, but with a single, cold, clear sentence. "You have always not known," I said. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and thin as a razor wire. It wasn't an accusation, it was a diagnosis. His mouth opened, then closed. He had no response. His entire life was built on the foundation of not knowing, of looking away. I put the statement back in the folio and took out my phone. I unlocked it and navigated to the hidden album. I opened the file, 12B entry 01, and turned the screen towards him. It was the second photo I had taken that day. The close-up of my 19-year-old wrist, a tapestry of angry red welts and blooming purple bruises. The image was sharp, clinical, and in the background, out of focus, but perfectly, damnably recognizable, was his own face, passing by in the hallway, his expression strained, his eyes fixed on the box of books in his arms. He saw himself choosing the box over his daughter. His gaze snapped away from the phone, darting around the room as if looking for an escape. He couldn't look at it. He couldn't look at me. His hands began to tremble. It was a faint tremor at first, then a visible, uncontrollable shaking, the same tremor I remembered seeing in his hands that day, as he had adjusted his grip on that cardboard box, his knuckles white with the effort of holding on to his denial. The past and the present converged in that one, small, damning gesture. "Nora, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You can stop this. It doesn't have to go any further." He was begging me, not for Sable, not for the truth. He was begging me to let him go back to sleep, to rebuild the wall of his ignorance so he could continue to live inside it. He was asking me to carry the burden of the truth so that he could remain unburdened. I looked at this man, this stranger who was my father, and I felt a profound and hollow sadness. The anger was gone, burned away by the years, leaving only this empty space. "It's too late to stop," I said, my voice softer now. "But it's not too late for the truth." I turned away from him. It was a final act. I walked past the CEO and the chairman of the audit committee, towards the corporate counsel who was now flanked by a senior lawyer from the HR department. They were waiting for me. "Ms. Quinn," the lawyer said formally, "we have the preliminary findings of your audit. We will need all supporting documentation for the independent investigation." "Of course," I said. I placed the folio on a nearby table and opened it. Inside, every document was organized, every piece of digital media cataloged on a secured, encrypted hard drive. On top was a single-page form, a chain of custody declaration. It was a legal document, a formal transfer of evidence from the investigator to the adjudicating body. She handed me a pen. I signed my name on the line at the bottom. Nora Quinn, Senior Investigator, Dept. of Compliance and Internal Investigations. With that signature, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I wasn't her victim. I was a professional, an agent of the process. I was handing over a corporate matter, not a personal vendetta. The act itself was a shield. They could never call it a family squabble now. It was a documented case of corporate fraud, delivered through official channels. The HR lawyer cleared his throat, addressing the CEO and the committee chairman, but speaking loud enough for the remaining guests to hear. "Effective immediately. Sable Quinn is suspended, with pay, pending the results of a full, independent, third-party investigation." The process had begun. The machine was in motion. My part in starting it was over. I closed the folio, pushed it across the table, and turned without another word. I walked back down the aisle, past my father, who stood rooted to the spot, a ghost at a funeral. I didn't look at him. There was nothing left to see. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out of the ballroom into the silent, empty hallway. The air here was cool and still. I leaned my back against the wall, the marble cold through the fabric of my blazer. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in 10 years, I took a full, deep breath. It didn't catch in my throat. It didn't burn in my chest. It filled my lungs, clean and deep and quiet, the pressure that I had carried inside me for so long, a dense, heavy stone in my gut, simply dissolved. It was over. The fight was over. I had carried the truth in silence for a decade, and now, finally, I had given it a voice, and I was free. The corporate network was a living organism, and Sable's email hit it like a toxin. It arrived at 9 a.m. the next morning, sent from her personal account but addressed to the entire company's all-staff distribution list. The subject line was a declaration of war. The truth about the investigation. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic deflection. In 500 carefully crafted words, she painted herself as the victim of a vindictive, unstable stepdaughter who had been plotting against her for years. She called my evidence fabricated digital garbage, and the ceremony a well-rehearsed corporate ambush. She spoke of her love for my father, her dedication to Grayford, and her pain at this profoundly personal and disloyal betrayal. The email ended with a flourish of dark martyrdom. This is not a corporate investigation. It is a witch hunt. I have faith that the truth will prevail. My phone and work chat lit up with notifications. Colleagues sent messages ranging from shocked gossip to cautious expressions of support. I ignored them all. To engage in a public battle of words would be to step onto her battlefield, to descend into the mud of emotion and personal attacks. That was her territory. Mine was the cold, clean, sterile environment of verifiable fact. I did not reply to her email. I did not issue a statement. Instead, I forwarded a single, encrypted link to Arthur Vance and the other members of the audit committee, with a copy to the independent investigators. The link led to the fully executed vendor contract between Grayford Systems and Briar Lodge. It was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar exclusive agreement. I directed their attention to Schedule C, the addendum that detailed the specific services to be rendered. It was blank. It was an empty contract, a hollow shell designed to allow for limitless, unscrutinized spending. Signed and approved by Sable Quinn, it was a license to steal, written in legal language. My message was clear. She calls me a liar. I give you more proof. The independent investigators, a team of forensic accountants and former federal prosecutors from a white shoe law firm, had been given the full Project Nightingale file. They worked with a relentless, quiet efficiency that I deeply admired. They called me 2 days later about a specific expense, a $2,000 dinner at an exclusive restaurant, which Sable had expensed as a dinner with a prospective candidate. The candidate, when contacted, had no recollection of the dinner. Sable claimed it was a mistake, that she had been homesick that night and one of her directors must have used the wrong card. "We have the receipt," the investigator on the phone said, his voice tired. "But it's not enough to definitively place her there." "One moment," I said. I opened my original evidence file. The photo I had taken of that receipt was high resolution, captured under bright, flat light. I opened the image in a forensic analysis program. I zoomed in, pixel by pixel, on the curved surface of a wine glass sitting on the table, and there, distorted but unmistakable in the convex reflection, was a face. It was Sable, her mouth open, laughing at something someone across the table had said. It was a ghost in the machine, a detail so small no one would ever think to look for it. I isolated the reflection, enhanced the clarity, and attached a sworn affidavit confirming I had not altered the original image in any way. I sent it to the investigators. Exhibit 73B, photographic proof of presence. My silence in the face of her public attack was unnerving the system. As she screamed into the void, I continued to feed the investigative machine with cold, hard data. My next delivery was an analysis of the timesheets for the 12 contract employees in the People Operations Department, cross-referenced with the dates of the mandatory Briar Lodge retreats. The data was unequivocal. Over a period of 2 years, these employees had been compelled to attend 5 weekend retreats, totaling over 100 hours of unpaid time per person. It was a systematic violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act, a federal offense that exposed the company to significant legal and financial liability. This was no longer just about stolen money. It was about stolen time, stolen wages. The digital forensics team, meanwhile, had finished their analysis of the volatile memory image from Sable's laptop. Kenji's report was a thing of beauty. The RAM snapshot had captured fragments of the Signal desktop client's encryption keys. They were able to partially reconstruct the message database she had tried so desperately to delete. The recovered messages were damning. They found conversations between Sable and her inner circle of directors discussing a special compensation program. This led the investigators to search the company's document server for a term they found in the chats. Side letter. They found it. It was an unofficial letter of agreement, drafted by Sable but not approved by the board or the compensation committee. It granted her 4 key directors a significant number of restricted stock units, contingent on their meeting a set of vague performance goals that she alone would evaluate. It was a secret, off-the-books incentive plan designed to buy their loyalty and ensure their silence. It was a staggering breach of corporate governance. The final phase was to bring the human evidence forward. Mercer and I arranged for the 3 key witnesses to meet with the investigators and a certified notary public. First was the young contract designer, who bravely recounted the veiled threats to her job. Second was a junior accountant in accounts payable who, after being granted whistleblower protection, admitted that Sable had personally instructed him to process the Briar Lodge invoices without the required documentation. The third was a surprise, a witness I hadn't found but the investigators had, a former security guard from Briar Lodge, who testified that he had, on multiple occasions, been instructed to stock the Quinn's private suite with cases of rare wine and liquor, all of which he was told to bill to the Grayford corporate account. Each of them told their story. Each story was transcribed. Each transcript was reviewed, corrected, and signed. I watched as the notary public pressed her seal onto each signature page, the heavy embossing leaving a permanent, official mark. Each affidavit was a final stitch, closing the loop on a different aspect of Sable's corruption, the coercion, the financial fraud, the cover-up. The chain of custody for every piece of testimony was now formally closed. The evidence bag was sealed. A week after the ceremony, the report from the independent investigators was delivered to the CEO and the board of directors. It was 150 pages of dense, factual prose. The executive summary was brutal. It confirmed 7 major categories of misconduct, from embezzlement and violation of federal labor laws to breach of fiduciary duty and evidence spoliation. It concluded with a single, unambiguous recommendation: immediate termination for cause and referral of findings to the appropriate district attorney's office. The report was a bomb. Sable's email had been a firecracker. This was a tactical strike. That evening, I received a calendar notification on my work phone. It was from the CEO's office. The subject was simple: emergency meeting of the board of directors and special shareholder session. The time was 8 a.m. the next morning. A link to the agenda was attached. There was only one item on it: ethics and governance, review and action regarding a senior executive. The final act was about to begin, and this time, it wouldn't just be in front of a few hundred employees. It would be in front of the people who owned the company, the people who held all the power. Gray Hall was the company's formal auditorium, a tiered amphitheater designed to make a statement. It was a space for shareholder meetings and major product launches, a corporate cathedral of brushed steel, gray acoustics, and recessed lighting. Today, it was a courtroom. The massive LED screen that usually displayed soaring revenue charts now bore a stark, solemn message in white block letters: Special Meeting of the Board of Directors and Shareholders, Ethics and Governance. Sable was there, seated beside her own legal counsel, a high-priced litigator from a downtown firm. She looked composed, defiant, a queen in exile. My father sat a few rows behind her, alone. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a man lost in the wreckage of a life he thought he knew. I sat with Mercer at a table on the floor, facing the board on their raised dais. The chairman, Arthur Vance, called the meeting to order. He dispensed with the usual formalities and went directly to the point, referencing the independent counsel's report, which had been distributed to all attendees. He opened the floor for questions. A man in the second row, a notoriously sharp-tongued hedge fund manager who owned a significant block of shares, stood up. He didn't address the board. He looked directly at Sable. "I have a simple question," he said, his voice laced with acid. "I've been reading this company's annual reports for a decade, and every single one features the slogan, 'People First.' Could someone explain to me at what point that came to mean family first?" A dry, bitter laugh rippled through the hall. Sable's lawyer shot to his feet to object, but the damage was done. The tone was set. Vance gavelled for order and then looked at me. "Ms. Quinn, the committee has reviewed your findings. The floor is yours." I walked to the lectern. I did not bring a thick binder or a stack of papers. I brought a single slide remote. My heart was a steady, rhythmic beat. This was not a performance. This was a presentation of a final audit. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and amplified in the silent room. "My name is Nora Quinn. For the past 10 years, I have worked for this company. For much of that time, I have been investigating a systemic failure in our corporate governance. My presentation will last 12 minutes. It has 18 slides. It is organized around 3 simple concepts: motive, method, and money." I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. Motive. Personal enrichment. I walked them through it. The lifestyle that exceeded their combined salaries, the mortgages, the cars, the country club membership, all subsidized by a shadow budget. Click. Method 1. Expense fraud. I showed the slide of the Briar Lodge invoice next to the Instagram post, then another, and another, a pattern of behavior, undeniable and repetitive. I didn't use emotional language. I said, "Here we see a documented correlation between personal travel and corporate expenditure." Click. Method 2. Vendor kickbacks. I showed the blank Schedule C on the Briar Lodge contract. I showed the wire transfer to Vance Strategic Consulting. This $75,000 payment for coaching was transferred 1 week later from Elias Vance's business account to a joint checking account held by Mr. Vance and his sister, Sable Quinn. Click. Method 3. Labor theft. I showed the timesheet analysis. Over 100 hours of unpaid labor per contract employee, a direct violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act, exposing this company to an estimated $3 million in fines and back pay liability. Click. Money. This slide was just a number, $1.72 million. This is the conservative, documented total of the direct financial impact to Grayford Systems from the fraudulent expenses, vendor overpayments, and non-compliant stock grants over a 5-year period. This does not include legal exposure or reputational damage. Each number was a stone I placed on the lectern. The weight of them filled the room. I finished in 11 minutes and 45 seconds. I didn't summarize or offer a concluding thought. The facts were the conclusion. I simply said, "Thank you," and returned to my seat. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Mercer stood up. "Mr. Chairman, members of the board," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "On behalf of my client, and in my capacity as a fellow shareholder, I hereby move to table a resolution. The resolution is as follows: that the employment of the Chief People Officer, Sable Quinn, be terminated for cause, effective immediately, that all severance, stock options, and other post-employment benefits be suspended pending the outcome of legal proceedings, and finally, that the full, unredacted report of the independent counsel be turned over to the office of the district attorney." Before the chairman could even call for a second, a woman at the front stood up. She was Eleanor Vance, no relation to the chairman, a quiet, elderly woman who had inherited her husband's massive founding stake in the company. She was known for her silence at these meetings. "I second the motion," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. Then she added, "And furthermore, I wish to grant my full proxy voting rights for this and all subsequent motions to Miss Nora Quinn." A shockwave went through the room. Sable, who had viewed me as nothing more than a nuisance, a little compliance girl, now watched as I was handed one of the single largest voting blocks in the company. I was no longer just the witness. I was a power broker. The chairman called for the vote. The electronic tally began. Then, from the back of the room, a voice. A point of order. I wish to record my vote verbally. It was my father. He stood up slowly. He looked pale, and older than he had a week ago. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at Sable. He was looking at the stage, at the empty space where the ceremony had been, as if finally seeing the ghost of what had happened there. He was looking at the wound. Dean Quinn, he said, his voice shaking but clear. Vote aye. It was the first truly honest thing I had heard him say in 10 years. It was an admission, an act of penance, a beginning. The result was a formality. The resolution passed with 91% of the vote. Sable didn't move. She just stared at my father, her eyes 2 chips of ice. Arthur Vance looked to the back of the room. Mark and his security team, who had been waiting, began to walk down the aisle. There were no handcuffs. There was no struggle. They simply stood by her chair, and after a moment, she rose and walked between them. The only sound was the click of her heels on the polished floor. She gave me one last, frozen glare as she passed. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Then she was gone. As the room buzzed, I turned to Mercer. He was already on his tablet. The judge is ready, he said. A video window popped up on the large screen. It was Judge Alvarez, sitting in her chambers. Mr. Mercer, Ms. Quinn, she said, I have reviewed the motion to convert the temporary order to a permanent one. Along with the filed transcript of this meeting, the motion is granted. The protective order is now permanent. The clerk will transmit the signed order electronically. It was done in less than a minute. Clean, final. The chairman banged his gavel. The board has voted. The matter is concluded. We will now move to the next item of business. He looked down at his agenda. A reaffirmation of the Grayford System's workplace safety and whistleblower protection policy. The document appeared on the screen. It was a new, stronger, clearer policy. It established a direct, anonymous reporting line to the board's audit committee, bypassing management entirely. It guaranteed protection from retaliation. It mandated ethics training for all senior executives. At the bottom of the last page, in small print, was the document's author, drafted by N. Quinn, Dept. Of Compliance. My work was already becoming part of the company's DNA. As the new policy document faded from the screen, the CEO, Robert Ashford, remained at the lectern. The room was still, the air thick with the aftermath. He looked out over the shareholders, his expression one of weary resolve, as if he had just steered a ship through a hurricane. Then, his eyes found me. He picked up the wireless microphone from its stand and held it out. It wasn't a command, but an offering, a transfer of power. Nora, he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the room's perfect acoustics. Do you have a final statement for the record? I walked back to the lectern. I didn't look at the board members or the shareholders. I didn't look at the empty chair where Sable had sat, or the one where my father was now a ghost. I looked directly into the small, dark, unblinking eye of the internal broadcast camera mounted on the back wall. I was speaking to the room, but I was also speaking to every employee who would watch this recording. I was speaking to the system itself. At Grayford, I said, my voice steady and clear, we promote safety, not silence. It was not a speech. It was a policy statement. It was a promise, and it was a verdict. With the remote still in my hand, I pressed the button one last time. A final image filled the screen. There was no title, no data, no explanation. It was just the photograph of my 19-year-old wrist, bruised and swollen from the force of Sable's rings. A silent, anonymous testament to the cost of the old way. A relic from the museum of a private war that had just ended with a corporate execution. The image held for 5 seconds, an eternity in the silent room. Then, the screen went black. There was no applause. There couldn't be. You don't applaud a necessary surgery. You don't cheer at the signing of a restraining order. What fell over the room was something else entirely. Something far more powerful than applause. It was a deep, resonant, and unanimous silence. It wasn't the silence of fear that Sable had cultivated for years. It wasn't the silence of complicity my father had lived in. It was the silence of consensus, the quiet, profound sound of a fundamental truth finally being acknowledged. It was the kind of silence I had chosen, and it was finally mine. I placed the microphone carefully back in its cradle on the lectern. The soft click echoed in the stillness. I turned and stepped down from the stage. As my feet hit the floor, my phone, which I had pre-programmed, sent a single, secure, time-released command to the company's IT servers. Across the global network, an automated email was deploying to every single employee. The subject line was the new policy's title: a reaffirmation of workplace safety. The body of the email contained the full text of the policy I had drafted. At the bottom was a direct, encrypted link to the new, independent, board-supervised whistleblower portal. The system was already healing itself. I walked up the tiered aisle, not looking back. I didn't need to. The past was contained in that room, sealed in the minutes of the meeting. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of Gray Hall and stepped into the lobby. Through the vast glass walls, I could see the sky over Ridgemont had opened up. A soft, steady rain was falling, the drops streaking down the panes like tears. It was the same kind of quiet, cleansing rain that had fallen on move-in day 10 years ago, but the air no longer carried the metallic tang of shame and unshed tears. It just smelled of wet pavement and clean, cold air. My phone vibrated in my hand. A new text message. It was from Mercer's paralegal. A single, declarative sentence. Court has confirmed electronic receipt and filing of the permanent protective order. It was a lock, turned and bolted. I opened my messaging app and selected a contact from my corporate directory. Mark, head of security. My fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing a final, simple instruction. It was not a request. It was a work order. Please remove the former CPO's official portrait from the executive wall of honor. I pressed send. There was nothing left to do. Every loose end was tied. Every file was closed. Every action had a corresponding and final reaction. I turned and looked back at the doors to Gray Hall. They swung slowly shut behind me, the latch catching with a heavy, definitive thud, the sound of a vault being sealed. The revenge was over. It ended right there, in that sound. There was no afterscene. There was no gloating. There was only the process, now complete, and the quiet rain outside. There was no celebration. There was no victory lap. The day after the meeting, the company went back to work. The machine, having excised a malignant part, recalibrated and continued to run. The aftermath was not a story. It was a series of procedures. It was a closing ledger. The full 150-page report from the independent counsel was classified as attorney-client privileged and sealed. A single digital copy was entered into the corporate legal vault, subject to a mandatory 7-year retention period. Access was restricted to the general counsel and the chairman of the audit committee. It became a digital ghost, a silent record of a war that was officially over. The litigation hold I had initiated was formally extended by the legal department. It was expanded to cover all transactions, communications, and expense reports related to the employee wellness budget for the preceding 24 months. The data would be preserved, not for a trial, but for a corporate autopsy, to ensure that every branching vein of the corruption was identified and cauterized. The board of directors, in its first action following the special meeting, voted to immediately restructure the company's ethics committee. The new charter mandated that one of the 5 voting seats must be held by a non-managerial, frontline employee, elected by their peers. The power of oversight was, in a small but meaningful way, redistributed. The committee would no longer be a room of executives judging other executives. Robert Ashford, the CEO, called me to his office. The atmosphere was formal, respectful. He offered me the position of interim chief people officer. To guide the department through this transition, I declined. My work was not in leading people. It was in protecting the integrity of the system that governed them. I was the gatekeeper of the evidence, the custodian of the process. I told him I was more valuable where I was, in compliance. He understood. I remained the keeper of the keys, ensuring the locks were never broken again. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was my father. The message contained 2 words: "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time, the apology he couldn't give me for 10 years, delivered in the sterile, impersonal medium of a text. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about all the things I could say. Instead, I replied with an instruction, a call to a single, concrete action. Give a formal statement to the investigators. Don't make promises. He was scheduled to be interviewed the next day. His choice was the same as it had been a decade ago: be a witness or be a statue. The business world adjusted with cold, impersonal efficiency. Grayford Systems formally terminated its exclusive vendor contract with Briar Lodge, citing gross contractual and ethical violations. The company's procurement policy was updated, and a new, more rigorous process for vetting and approving vendors was implemented. Briar Lodge, facing its own internal investigation and the loss of its largest client, quietly filed for bankruptcy 2 months later. No newspapers ran breathless stories of my ordeal. No magazines profiled me as a brave victim. I made sure of it. My story was not for public consumption. The only things that became public were the new rules, the updated employee handbook, the properly paid overtime that started appearing on the paychecks of the contract workers. The justice was not in a headline. It was in the quiet, boring, and beautiful functioning of a fair system. It was in the new lines of code that governed the company. On my desk, the encrypted hard drive containing Project Nightingale sat in its dock. I initiated the final command, locking the drive with a complex passphrase and retiring the encryption key. The data vault was now closed, a black box of a finished investigation. The only key that mattered now was the lesson I had learned, a phrase that had become my own private mantra. Truth requires a process. It had been the organizing principle of my revenge, and now it would be the organizing principle of my peace. I moved my mouse across the screen of my computer. The desktop background was a photo of a mountain landscape, a picture of a world I hadn't felt a part of for a very long time. I went into the settings, selected desktop, and chose the option for a solid color. The screen went to a calm, neutral, empty gray, a blank slate, an ending. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm truly grateful to have you here with me. I would love to know where in the world you're listening from. So please drop a comment down below and share your thoughts on Nora's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you want to help this story reach even more people, please support it by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.